No one wanted the silent Omega, until the Alpha King claimed her before all. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. No one wanted the silent Omega, until the Alpha King claimed her before all. Let's return to our main character Lyra. Lyra stood at the center of the grand hall, the harsh eyes of the crowd cutting through her like daggers. She had hoped just for a moment that she could disappear. But there was no hiding in the spotlight. The whispers swirled around her like an unrelenting storm, each word louder than the last. Broken Omega. Useless. She'll never find a mate. Lyra's heart sank further with each cruel taunt. Her world had always been quiet, too quiet in fact. Unlike other Omegas, she didn't have the unique scent that drew attention, the one that made alpha wolves notice. And so, she was invisible. Not in a good way but in a way that left her isolated, unwanted. Her family, once proud of their lineage, had abandoned her, seeing her as little more than a burden. At 21, she had already given up on the idea of ever being loved. She was always overlooked, never even considered a potential mate for any of the strong alphas who paraded through the kingdom. Tonight, however, felt like it would be different. The grand ceremony was underway, where alphas chose their mates, and yet, no one had so much as glanced in Lyra's direction. Her heart ached with the sharp sting of rejection, and she kept her head low, pretending that the weight of the world pressing down on her wasn't suffocating. The festivities continued around her, but she felt like a ghost, unseen, unnoticed. The laughter and chatter seemed like a distant hum, too far away to touch her. She couldn't help but wonder how much longer she would endure this kind of life. How much longer could she stand being treated as if she didn't matter? The other Omegas, those who had the scent, were being taken by alphas left and right. They were the ones being fought over, their worth undeniable. But not her. Lyra's eyes stung as she fought back the tears. She couldn't let them see her cry. She couldn't give them the satisfaction of knowing how much their rejection hurt. But just as she was about to step back into the shadows, away from the judgmental gazes, she felt a shift in the air. A presence. Strong. Unyielding. She couldn't explain it, but everything around her seemed to still. Then a deep voice cut through the noise. Enough. The crowd fell silent, eyes turning to the figure who had spoken. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as she looked up, unable to stop herself from staring. There, standing tall and imposing, was none other than the Alpha King Roderick. He had always been a mysterious figure, known for his strength, his ruthlessness, and his ability to command respect without ever having to speak a word. His icy blue eyes scanned the room and then they landed on her. Lyra froze. For the first time in her life she felt seen. He walked toward her with a confidence that made the room seem smaller. As he approached, the crowd parted like the Red Sea, the murmur of voices falling into a stunned silence. Roderick stopped in front of her, towering over her small frame. She could barely breathe, her heart racing in her chest. Then, to everyone's shock, he spoke, his voice low and commanding. She is mine. The words echoed through the hall, a proclamation that sent ripples of disbelief through the crowd. No one dared to speak, no one dared to move. But Lyra? She couldn't even comprehend what was happening. The Alpha King, the most powerful figure in the kingdom, had just claimed her. You will never lay a hand on her again, Roderick continued, his voice dripping with authority. Touch her, and you will answer to me. The crowd was still. The whispers stopped. The world outside Lyra's small bubble ceased to exist. The humiliation she had endured, the years of being nothing in the eyes of the world, seemed to vanish. In that moment Roderick was her shield. He was the one who saw her, truly saw her. And just like that, she wasn't the broken Omega anymore. She wasn't the one who had been overlooked. She was his. Lyra stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. The Alpha King, the most feared and respected leader in all of Arvoria, had claimed her before everyone. His words hung in the air, heavy with power, as the room remained silent in shock. She could feel the weight of his gaze, but it wasn't filled with disdain or anger like the others. Instead, it was something different, something she had never felt before: acknowledgement. "You will never lay a hand on her again." Roderick's voice echoed through the hall, firm and unyielding. The Alpha King's presence was overwhelming. His voice was the kind that made the world stop, forcing people to listen, to obey. His words had not only silenced the room, but they had also shattered the chain of ridicule that had bound her for so long. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt seen. The realization sent a tremor through her, but she quickly steadied herself. She couldn't afford to show weakness now. Roderick's gaze never left hers, and despite the chaos around them, Lyra stood tall, trying to maintain her composure. She had spent so many years being invisible, so many years wishing for someone to notice her. But this was something she hadn't expected. The Alpha King, a man who could have anyone, had chosen her. Wasn't the frightened, overlooked Omega anymore. She wasn't the girl who had spent her life in the shadows. She was his. And that thought, more than anything, filled her with strength. As their hands touched, a spark of electricity shot through her, sending a jolt of warmth throughout her body. She could feel the connection between them, deep and undeniable. It was the bond of fate, the one she had heard whispered about in stories, the one that only a few were lucky enough to experience. The crowd around them was still, and for the first time that evening, the hall felt alive with possibility. Roderick, the Alpha King, had chosen her. And in that moment, Lyra realized that everything she had endured, the pain, the rejection, the loneliness, had led her to this point. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer the silent Omega. She was his Luna, the Alpha King's mate. As Roderick led her to the center of the hall, the crowd parted for them, their eyes filled with awe and confusion. But Lyra didn't care. She no longer needed their approval. She had Roderick's. And that was all that mattered now. He had given her a place in this world, a place where she belonged. As they reached the center of the hall, Roderick turned to the crowd once more. "This is my mate," he declared, his voice ringing out with finality. "She will stand by my side, and she will be treated with the respect she deserves. Anyone who dares challenge that will answer to me." The power in his voice was undeniable. No one moved, no one spoke. All that was left was silence. Lyra could feel the weight of their eyes on her. But this time it didn't make her shrink back. She stood tall beside Roderick, her heart swelling with a sense of pride she had never known before. For the first time she felt truly seen, truly valued. The whispers had stopped. The laughter had stopped. And now in the silence all that remained was her and Roderick, the Alpha King, together. In that moment, Lyra knew that nothing could ever hurt her again. She had found her place in this world, and no one would ever take it away from her. As the Alpha King Roderick led Lyra through the hall, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The nobles, the alphas, and even the betas who once looked down on her now watched in stunned silence, as if unsure of what to make of the scene unfolding before them. Lyra, still processing the overwhelming declaration from Roderick, walked beside him, her heart racing with each step. She could feel his presence like a force of nature, his power radiating outward, making the world around them seem smaller. They reached the grand balcony overlooking the kingdom, and Roderick turned to face her, his gaze softening for the first time since he had entered the hall. "You are not just any Omega, Lyra," he said, his voice low and steady. "You are my Luna now. And that means the world will see you as my equal." Lyra's mind swirled with questions, but the most pressing one was why him, why now? She had spent years believing she was worthless, invisible, but here she was, standing next to the most powerful man in the kingdom. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why me? Why did you choose me?" Roderick smiled, though there was a trace of something sorrowful in his eyes. "Because I see something in you, Lyra," he replied. "Something that no one else bothered to look for." He took her hand in his fingers warm against her cold skin. "You are strong, not in the way they expect, but in the quiet resilience you carry within. You've survived without anyone's help, and that strength is what drew me to you." Lyra swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling deep within her chest. She had always thought of herself as weak, someone who needed protection. But now, as she looked at Roderick, she realized that his faith in her was not just about what she could do for him. It was about who she was, about the spirit she carried despite all the hardship. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. She wasn't just the Omega no one wanted anymore. She was the mate of the Alpha King. And with that came a power she had never allowed herself to acknowledge. "What do I do now?" Lyra asked, her voice steadying. "You stand by my side," Roderick answered, his voice commanding but full of warmth. "And you do what you've always done, be yourself. The kingdom will need us both, but I trust you. You are not here to be a trophy or an ornament. You are my equal, and we will rule together." The words, though simple, were a promise. A promise that no matter what had happened in the past, no matter how many times she had been overlooked, it didn't matter now. She had a place in the world, a place by Roderick's side, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged. The next few days passed in a whirlwind. Lyra was introduced to the court as Roderick's Luna, and the whispers that had once followed her every step were now replaced with awe and curiosity. The nobles who had once mocked her now bowed before her, and even the harshest critics of Roderick's rule could not deny the power of the bond they shared. Yet there were still those who watched from the shadows, waiting for Lyra to fail. The pressure to prove herself weighed heavily on her shoulders, but every time she looked to Roderick, she felt the strength of his belief in her. She wasn't alone anymore. One evening as the sun set behind the mountains, casting a golden hue over the kingdom, Lyra and Roderick stood at the edge of the balcony, looking out over the land they would now rule together. The wind whipped through Lyra's hair, and she closed her eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over her. Roderick's presence behind her was a constant reassurance. "You're ready," he said softly, his voice just above a whisper. "We'll face challenges, but I know you can handle them. You've always had this in you, Lyra." She turned to him, her heart full. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, "for seeing me, for believing in me." Roderick smiled, his eyes locking with hers, filled with a deep understanding. "You've always had value, Lyra," he said. "I just needed to remind you of it." And in that moment, Lyra knew that everything had changed. She was no longer the silent, forgotten Omega. She was the Luna of Arvoria, and with Roderick by her side, there was nothing they couldn't overcome together. The days that followed Roderick's declaration were filled with both wonder and challenge for Lyra. As the Luna of Arvoria, the weight of responsibility was heavier than she had ever imagined, but with it came the respect she had longed for, the kind of respect she never thought she would receive. People who once ignored her, laughed at her weakness, now looked at her with awe and fear, and in some strange way that gave her strength. She had never been in the spotlight before, and now it felt overwhelming at times, but each time she found herself faltering, she would look to Roderick, and his unwavering belief in her steadied her. They began their shared rule with careful deliberation, addressing the kingdom's many issues, from political alliances to the welfare of the pacts that looked to them for leadership. Roderick, ever the stoic and formidable leader, had a clear vision for the future of Arvoria, and Lyra found herself contributing more and more to their plans, offering solutions that surprised even her. One afternoon as they sat in the royal study, going over the latest reports, Lyra felt the familiar surge of pride as Roderick placed his hand over hers. "Your ideas are changing the way we lead this kingdom, Lyra," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You're not just my mate. You are the strength I didn't know I needed." Her heart swelled at his words, and though she had always felt inferior, she now realized that her silence, her quiet strength, was just as valuable as any bold action. But with their rising influence, the threats to their reign began to grow. Whispers spread like wildfire, fueled by envy and fear. There were those in the kingdom who could not accept the idea of an Omega rising to such a powerful position. The nobles particularly resented the change, and some of them began to scheme against Roderick and Lyra, determined to weaken their bond. One evening as Roderick and Lyra took a walk through the royal gardens, Lyra sensed something was amiss. The air felt tense, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. She turned to Roderick, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel it, Roderick," she said, her gaze scanning the shadows. "There are those who want to see us fall." Roderick, ever composed, looked at her with his piercing blue eyes, his expression unreadable. "Let them try," he said with a quiet confidence that reassured her. "We've faced worse, and together we'll face whatever comes." But Lyra knew this was different. This time, the threat wasn't from outside forces alone. It was from within their own court. And those who had once bowed before them now whispered about rebellion. The tension between the nobles and the newly established leadership grew. Lyra began to receive anonymous letters, messages filled with veiled threats and dark promises. They spoke of her not as a leader but as a mistake, a wrong choice that needed to be corrected. One night, after reading yet another letter that mocked her rise to power, Lyra stood by the balcony, staring out at the distant horizon. Her mind raced with the weight of the responsibility that now rested on her shoulders. It was then that Roderick approached her, his presence soothing, like a calm in the middle of the storm. "You are not just my Luna," he said softly, stepping beside her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You are the heart of this kingdom, and as long as we are together, there is nothing that can tear us apart." His words wrapped around her like a shield, and for the first time since they had begun ruling together, Lyra felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just the Omega anymore. She was the Luna, the equal partner of the Alpha King, and together, they would face whatever trials came their way. The whispers, the threats, none of it mattered. What mattered was the bond they shared. A bond that could not be broken by anyone, not even by the ones who sought to bring them down. With Roderick by her side, Lyra knew they could weather any storm. As they stood together on the balcony, the stars above them shining brightly, Lyra felt an overwhelming sense of peace. For the first time in her life she truly belonged not just to the kingdom but to herself, to her place beside Roderick. Together they would lead Arvoria into a new era. One where no one, not even the darkest of threats, could ever take them down. As the days passed, the challenges they faced only grew more intense. The whispers of rebellion had turned into open defiance, and Lyra felt the weight of the kingdom's future pressing down on her. Every move she and Roderick made was scrutinized, judged, and often criticized. The nobles who once greeted her with cold indifference, now spoke to her with veiled contempt, though they dared not speak openly with Roderick at her side. The tension in the court was palpable, but it wasn't just the nobles she had to worry about. There were forces outside the castle walls that were beginning to stir. One evening as the moon hung low in the sky, Lyra stood by the window looking out over the kingdom, her thoughts swirling in turmoil. She had never expected life as Luna to be easy, but the constant threat to their reign was something she hadn't anticipated. As Roderick joined her by the window, his presence once again provided a comforting sense of steadiness. He stood behind her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, and she could feel the warmth of his touch. "What troubles you, my Luna?" he asked, his voice soft yet full of authority, the kind of voice that had once struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. Lyra turned to face him, her eyes filled with concern. "The kingdom is divided," she said, her voice laced with worry. "There are those who want us to fail, and there are those who have already begun to conspire against us. How do we protect everything we've worked for?" Roderick's gaze softened, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. "We will stand together, Lyra," he said, his voice unwavering. "They may try to tear us apart, but as long as we are united, we cannot be defeated. You are my Luna, and you are just as powerful as any Alpha in this kingdom." His words, though simple, brought a sense of comfort to Lyra, and for the first time in days she felt a flicker of hope. She had spent so much time questioning her own worth, wondering if she could truly live up to the role of Luna. But in that moment, Roderick reminded her that she didn't need to prove herself to anyone. She already had everything she needed within her. The next morning they were faced with the first true test of their leadership since Lyra's rise to Luna. A group of nobles led by Lord Virek had openly defied Roderick's authority, claiming that Lyra was unfit to rule by his side. The tension in the court had reached its breaking point, and something had to be done. Lyra and Roderick stood together in the royal hall, the court surrounding them, their eyes filled with expectation. Lord Virek stepped forward, his face twisted in disdain, and addressed the king. "Your Majesty, it is clear that your rule is being undermined by this Omega. She has no place at your side. You, as the rightful Alpha King, are being weakened by her presence." He sneered, his voice dripping with venom. The crowd murmured in agreement, their eyes trained on Roderick and Lyra, waiting for a response. Roderick's gaze was cold, his expression unreadable, but Lyra could feel the tension rising within him. This was the moment that would define their reign, and she knew that how they handled it would determine the future of Arvoria. Without hesitation, Lyra stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "Lord Virek," she began, her words ringing through the hall, "I have earned my place by Roderick's side. I am not just an Omega, and I am not here to be overlooked. I am his Luna, and together, we will lead this kingdom to a future of prosperity." The room fell into stunned silence, the nobles unable to respond to her bold declaration. She had never spoken like this before, and to everyone in the room, it was a reminder of her strength, the strength Roderick had always seen in her. As Lyra stood there, facing the court with unwavering confidence, Roderick's hand found hers, and he placed a firm kiss on the back of it. "You have my support now and always," he said, his voice firm with conviction. His words echoed through the hall, and for the first time, the court felt the full force of their united front. The nobles, stunned into silence by Lyra's declaration, had no choice but to step back. Lord Virek, his face flushed with anger, bowed curtly before them and retreated to the back of the room. The atmosphere in the hall shifted, and though there was still much work to be done, Lyra knew that this was a victory. A small one, but one nonetheless. She had proven to herself and to the kingdom that she was more than just the silent Omega. She was the Luna, and she would not be silenced. In the days that followed, Roderick and Lyra worked tirelessly to ensure that their rule was solidified. But Lyra's confidence had grown. The threats, though still present, seemed less daunting now that she had found her voice. She was no longer just the Omega in the shadows. She was the Luna, the equal partner of the Alpha King, and together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The kingdom of Arvoria would not fall, not as long as they stood united. And Lyra knew that with Roderick by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. The days following Lord Virek's challenge brought a new sense of purpose for Lyra and Roderick. While the immediate threat had been quelled, the undercurrent of discontent within the court remained. Lyra was no longer the timid Omega, hiding in the shadows, but rather the Luna of Arvoria, standing by Roderick's side. And yet she knew that she had to prove herself continuously. The first few weeks of her reign as Luna were filled with council meetings, strategies, and decisions that shaped the kingdom's future. Roderick had always been a strategic leader, but with Lyra at his side, his reign had taken on a new light, one where every decision they made was a testament to their shared vision for Arvoria. There were days when Lyra felt the weight of the crown heavier than ever, the pressure of her position weighing on her shoulders. She could see the glances from the nobles, some respectful, others filled with resentment, and even a few who were biding their time, waiting for a moment of weakness. Roderick, though, always stood by her, his hand on her back, a constant source of support and strength. Yet the unrest in the kingdom was palpable. Outside the castle walls, whispers of rebellion grew louder, fueled by the very nobles who had once bent the knee to Roderick but now found his union with Lyra unacceptable. One evening, as Lyra stood by the window overlooking the vast kingdom, her mind wandered to the challenges they still faced. The letter she had received earlier that day weighed heavily on her heart. It was from one of the influential noble families, demanding a change in the royal decree. They called for her removal as Luna, citing her origins and her position as an Omega. Lyra's fingers clenched around the letter, her gaze darkening as she stared into the distance. But just as she was about to turn away, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Do not let them break you, my Luna." Roderick's voice was calm, yet filled with the power that had always captivated her. He had entered the room silently, as always, his presence commanding even without a word. "They may challenge you, they may question your worth, but you are the heart of this kingdom, Lyra. No one can take that from you." Lyra turned to face him, her eyes searching his, finding the unwavering support that had always been there. She had spent years wondering if she was worthy of this life, of Roderick's love, of the title of Luna, and yet with every word from him, her doubts seemed to vanish, replaced with an unshakable confidence. "I won't let them win," she said, her voice steady with resolve. "But I need to act, Roderick. We can't just sit here while they tear this kingdom apart from the inside." Roderick's gaze softened, and he stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. "You're not alone in this, Lyra. We face this together as equals. I trust you with everything." The sincerity in his words filled her with warmth, and for the first time, She truly believed in the strength she had within. Together, they would stand against any force that sought to tear them apart. The following days were filled with new plans and strategies. Lyra and Roderick knew they had to act quickly before the unrest spread further. They met with the leaders of the most influential noble families, those who remained loyal and those who were on the fence. Lyra's presence at the meetings, her calm demeanor, and her unwavering determination began to shift the tides. She spoke not as the quiet Omega she once was, but as a leader, a partner to Roderick, her voice strong and unyielding. "You may not believe in me now," she said to one particularly skeptical nobleman, "but I will prove my worth. I will not let this kingdom fall because of fear and prejudice. I am not just your Luna. I am your equal, and together, we will ensure the prosperity of Arvoria." The nobleman, once dismissive of her, now regarded her with a new respect, and for the first time, Lyra could feel the tide turning in their favor. But as they moved forward, there was no denying that their challenges were far from over. The rebellion that was simmering in the shadows had not yet shown its true face, and Lyra could feel the growing unrest just beyond the castle gates. But for now she had Roderick by her side, and with each passing day their bond grew stronger. They had overcome the doubts of others, the prejudice of the court, and now nothing could stand in their way. Arvoria would rise not just because of Roderick's strength, but because of the unwavering determination of its Luna, the silent Omega who had claimed her place by his side. As Lyra stood in the castle's great hall, her gaze meeting Roderick's, she knew they were ready. Whatever came next, they would face it together, and Arvoria's future would be secured by their hands. As the weeks passed, the challenges continued to test the strength of Lyra and Roderick's leadership. The rebellion that had been brewing in the shadows began to take form, but the bond they shared only grew stronger. Lyra had come so far from the quiet, overlooked Omega she once was, and now she stood as the equal of Roderick, his Luna, leading alongside him in the face of mounting adversity. Every decision they made was scrutinized, every action analyzed, but Lyra remained steadfast. There were still those who whispered behind their backs, but the once familiar sting of rejection no longer fazed her. Roderick had made her realize that she was more than just a symbol of power. She was the heart of Arvoria, and together, they would reshape the kingdom. One evening as they sat together in the royal study, going over the latest reports, Lyra felt a surge of frustration. It had been days since they had received word of another rebellious faction gaining ground, and it seemed no matter what they did, their enemies grew bolder. The weight of it all pressed on her shoulders, and she could feel the familiar grip of doubt creeping back into her thoughts. She glanced at Roderick, who had been silent for some time, his gaze focused on the papers before him. "Roderick," she began, her voice steady but tinged with concern, "how much longer can we keep up with this? We've tried everything, and yet the rebellion grows. We can't afford to wait any longer." Roderick set the papers down and turned to face her, his expression thoughtful but resolute. "Lyra," he said softly, "you have already proven more than you ever needed to. Together we've built this kingdom from the ground up, and together we will secure its future. I won't let them tear us apart." His words, as always, were a comfort, but Lyra knew deep down that they couldn't afford to take this lightly any longer. She had seen the way the rebellion had spread, how whispers of discontent had turned into open defiance. They had to act, and they had to act fast. "Then let's face them head-on," Lyra said, her voice firm, the decision clear in her mind. Roderick looked at her, a proud smile tugging at his lips. "That's the spirit of a true Luna," he said, standing up and extending his hand to her. "Let's put an end to this once and for all." The days that followed were filled with preparations. They called upon their most trusted allies, gathering their forces, planning their next move with precision. Lyra took her place at Roderick's side, her presence not as a passive observer, but as a leader in her own right, helping to strategize, offering solutions that would strengthen their hold on the kingdom. Together, they worked tirelessly, determined to ensure the safety and prosperity of Arvoria. Finally, the day came when they faced their enemies head-on. The battle was fierce, the stakes higher than ever before. The rebel forces, emboldened by their own hatred and resentment, met Roderick and Lyra with full force. The clash between them was unlike any Lyra had ever experienced. It was not just a physical battle. It was a battle of ideals, of the very future of the kingdom. The rebels wanted to tear down everything Roderick and Lyra had worked for, but the couple stood unwavering side by side. Lyra felt the power of her bond with Roderick, the strength of their shared resolve, and for the first time in her life, she knew that she was truly powerful, not because of her title, but because of the love and trust they had built together. As the battle raged on, Roderick and Lyra fought together with unmatched coordination, their movements seamless as they took down their enemies one by one. Lyra's confidence soared, and with each victory, she felt the weight of her role as Luna becoming more solidified. The rebellion, once thought to be unstoppable, was gradually crushed under the weight of their combined strength. By the end of the day, Roderick and Lyra stood victorious, their enemies vanquished, their kingdom safe. The sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the battlefield, and Lyra looked to Roderick, her heart swelling with pride. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Roderick turned to her, his eyes glowing with pride and admiration. "We did it together," he said, pulling her into an embrace. "This is only the beginning, Lyra. Together, we will lead Arvoria into an era of peace and prosperity." In that moment, as they stood together, victorious in their battle, Lyra realized that she was no longer the silent Omega. She was the Luna, the equal partner of the Alpha King, and with Roderick by her side, there was nothing they couldn't accomplish. Together they would shape the future of Arvoria, and nothing would ever stand in their way. The days following their victory were filled with a sense of peace and anticipation. Arvoria, once divided and on the brink of collapse, now stood strong under the leadership of Roderick and Lyra. The rebellion was crushed, and the nobles who had once resisted them were either silenced or had bent the knee in acceptance. For Lyra it was a new beginning, a confirmation that she was not just a figurehead but a true partner to Roderick, someone whose worth was undeniable. Together they set out to rebuild the kingdom, to create a legacy that would endure for generations. As they worked side by side, Lyra's confidence grew. She was no longer the silent Omega she had once been. She had found her voice, her place in the world, and the strength to lead. The kingdom flourished, and with each passing day, Lyra felt the deep bond between her and Roderick strengthening. They had become a force to be reckoned with, not just as rulers, but as a united front, ready to face whatever challenges the future held. One evening as they walked through the royal gardens, Roderick turned to Lyra, his gaze softening. "You have truly become everything I ever knew you could be," he said, his voice filled with admiration. Lyra smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "And you have helped me become that person," she replied. "I never would have thought I could lead like this, but with you by my side, I feel like I can do anything." Roderick took her hand in his grip firm and reassuring. "You always could," he said, his voice low and tender. "I just had to remind you of your own strength." The warmth of his words filled her with a sense of peace, and for the first time she realized how far she had come. She had once been an invisible Omega, looked down upon by the world, but now she was the Luna of Arvoria, standing beside the Alpha King as his equal. But even in this time of peace, danger was never far behind. While the kingdom had healed from the wounds of the rebellion, there were still whispers of unrest in the surrounding territories. Roderick had always known that the road to peace would not be easy, and so they continued to fortify their alliances and secure their borders. One day a messenger arrived with news of a neighboring kingdom, one that had long harbored grudges against Arvoria. Tensions were rising, and the possibility of war loomed on the horizon. Lyra, though she had never imagined being thrust into matters of war, knew that she couldn't stand by while Roderick faced such a threat alone. She had proven her strength before, and now she would prove it once more. Together they gathered their council and formulated a plan, one that would ensure Arvoria's survival, while maintaining their position as a kingdom of honor and strength. The days leading up to the confrontation were filled with anticipation and uncertainty. Lyra worked closely with Roderick, learning the intricacies of diplomacy, strategizing with the generals, and helping to rally the people of Arvoria. The kingdom's fate rested on their shoulders, and Lyra felt the weight of it more than ever. When the day finally came for the armies to march, Lyra stood at Roderick's side, her heart heavy with the knowledge that this battle could change everything. But as they faced their enemies, she knew that they were not just fighting for the kingdom, they were fighting for the future they had built together. As the battle unfolded, Lyra watched from the royal tent, her heart in her throat as she saw Roderick lead their forces with unparalleled courage and precision. She could feel his presence even from a distance, the power of his leadership radiating across the battlefield. As the dust began to settle and the sounds of battle faded, Lyra stood with Roderick once more victorious. They had secured their kingdom's future, and once again, they had proven that together, they could face anything. In the aftermath of the battle, as the kingdom began to heal once more, Lyra and Roderick took their place at the heart of Arvoria, not just as rulers, but as a symbol of strength, unity, and resilience. They had come so far from the days of doubt and uncertainty, and now nothing could stand in their way. Lyra, once the silent Omega, was now the Luna, the heart of Arvoria, and nothing, not even the darkest of enemies, could take that away from her. And with Roderick by her side, they knew that their legacy would endure for generations to come. Years passed and the kingdom of Arvoria flourished under the united rule of Lyra and Roderick. What had once been a land torn by division and rebellion was now a kingdom of strength, unity, and prosperity. The people who had once doubted Lyra's ability to lead, now looked to her as the heart of the kingdom, the guiding force beside Roderick that ensured Arvoria would never again falter. Together they had built a legacy, one founded on love, loyalty, and unwavering resolve. The scars of the rebellion had faded and Arvoria's borders were secure, the threats from neighboring kingdoms quelled, but the bond between Lyra and Roderick remained as strong as ever. Lyra, now more confident in her role than she had ever imagined, stood side by side with Roderick as they watched their kingdom thrive. No longer the silent Omega, she was a true partner to Roderick, not just as his Luna, but as a leader in her own right, someone who commanded respect from every corner of the kingdom. The nobles, once resentful of her rise, now respected her and often turned to her for counsel. The court, once filled with whispers of her inadequacy, now spoke her name with reverence. Lyra had proven herself, and in doing so she had solidified her place not only at Roderick's side, but as a ruler of Arvoria. One quiet evening as the two of them walked through the royal gardens, their hands intertwined, Lyra turned to Roderick, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I never imagined this life," she said softly, her voice full of awe, "that I would be here by your side ruling this kingdom. I never thought I would be strong enough." Roderick smiled, his gaze tender. "You always were strong, Lyra," he replied, his voice steady with the certainty of a man who had always believed in her. "You just needed to see it for yourself." Lyra looked around the gardens, the flowers blooming vibrantly, a symbol of everything they had built. "And I see it now," she said, her voice resolute. "But none of this would have been possible without you, Roderick. Without your faith in me, without your love and support, I would still be the broken Omega, hiding in the shadows." Roderick stopped and turned to face her, lifting her chin gently with his fingers. "You were never broken, Lyra," he said softly. "You just needed someone to help you realize that you were always meant for greatness. And I'm so proud of you." As the days passed, their kingdom continued to grow stronger, and the love between Roderick and Lyra remained unshaken. The challenges they had faced only made them more united, and with each victory, the kingdom thrived under their leadership. Roderick and Lyra's love story had become the foundation upon which Arvoria stood, and their people, once divided, were now united under a banner of hope and prosperity. But even as the kingdom blossomed, Lyra knew there was still much to do. There were always new challenges, new threats to face, but she was no longer afraid. She had Roderick by her side, and together they were unstoppable. As the years went on, their legacy lived on in the people of Arvoria, in the strength and unity they had built, and in the love that had guided them through the darkest times. Lyra, the silent Omega who had once been dismissed and overlooked, had risen to become the Luna, the equal partner of the Alpha King, and together, they had transformed their kingdom into one of the greatest in all the lands. And as they stood together, looking out over the kingdom they had built, Lyra knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. Their love, their strength, and their bond would continue to guide Arvoria into a future of peace and prosperity, a future they had created with their own hands. Nothing could ever tear them apart, for they were more than just rulers. They were partners, equals, and their love was the foundation of a kingdom that would endure for centuries to come.